Welcome to the Raven Knoll Show. I'm your host, Raven C. Knoll, known as the Soul Physician. I'm a wife, mother, counselor, mindset plus life coach, and speaker. And this is episode number 6. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to all my repeat listeners, and hello to anyone that's tuning in for the first time. Thank you so much for being a part of the RCN Pod Squad. You know, I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Getting back into recording. It's really great to be back. I mean, honestly, I only took a week off, which really isn't that long, but it was time away from podcasting because I've really fallen in love with podcasting. But this past weekend, I wanted to focus on my workshop that I hosted this past weekend, actually. And so I had to take a little bit of a break to host that workshop, which is the Power Pivot VIP workshop, not to be confused with the 90-day intensive, which is my one-on-one service. But the workshop is actually a spinoff of that. It's more so in a group format, and it's very small, very intimate, very hands-on. But I truly loved it, y'all. It was amazing. We hosted it virtually. It was really great because the platform we used actually allowed us to bring this experience to the women that were in attendance, because we were able to bring them on stage to ask questions and to just share. And then there were networking opportunities by going to virtual tables for them to connect. And we even had a vendor area. So it was just the bomb.com. So it was good. And now we're thinking of ways of how we can take it live and in person in the spring, hopefully. So yeah, it's going to be good. If you're interested in joining us for the next one, I'll link the link to the website to join the wait list for you in the show notes. But today, I want to move on into what we're going to be talking about in the episode that I'm very excited about. I think I'm excited about every episode, though. I probably say that in every single episode. That's okay. That's okay. As you know, or you may not know, if you are a new listener, I've been breaking down profiles of the most common high achieving women that I've worked with. And it's been juicy. Okay. Y'all have hit me up in my DMs with all kinds of screenshots of previous episodes. So I know the information is hitting home. Now, if you've been listening, if you've been tuning in, you may notice that as I outline these different types of women, there may be some overlap in some of the information that I share. And that's okay, because some of these women are similar and have some commonalities. So it's not odd to see, some of the same traits throughout these different profiles, or that if you even relate to all of the profiles or just one or two of them, right? It's normal. It's okay. And we're just going to continue outlining onward. Okay. So today we're going to discuss the third type of high achieving successful woman. And she is one who has an outward appearance of confidence and stability, but behind the scenes may be struggling with depression or sometimes bouts of sadness. She often feels misunderstood and has a hard time showing up as her true self, whether that's in the workplace, in business, or even in her peer-to-peer relationships. And she struggles with vulnerability, therefore isolates herself and disconnects from the world around her. I relate to this profile actually a lot because this is an area that I struggled with in my early 20s, and something that was very hard and difficult for me to overcome based on some of the information that I'm going to share with you. So this episode makes me a little bit excited. But in today's episode, we're talking about the lonely goal getter. Okay. The lonely goal getter. So here's the thing about lonely goal getters. Okay. They can appear successful and they can show up as successful, but typically there's an internal void that's not being fulfilled. Okay. So they can show up in the capacity of, hey, I got things all together. I'm doing well. I'm executing my goals. I'm building my platform. I'm leading well. They can show up as successful, but internally there is something that's disconnected for them. They can be around and in a crowd amongst people, but there's still a loneliness, right? There's still a loneliness there. There's a void that's not being fulfilled. They can also be around people, like I just said, and navigate boardrooms like a pro, okay? Speak on the biggest stages and go home and battle sadness and feel lonely. So I've seen it and I've personally experienced it. And if that's you, I want you to take some time out just to raise your hand and say, hey, that's me. Okay. First step is acknowledging that this may be who you are. So one thing to note is that loneliness is unique to every person. Okay. There is not a mold or a one fit all situation when it comes to loneliness. And that's really with many things in life. And so if you do a basic general Google search of what the word loneliness means or what it is, you're probably going to find something like being without company or being without friends or being without community or something of that nature. Most people don't realize that you can have company around you and you can have tons of friends and still be lonely. So that definition really does not cut it when it comes to loneliness. Because again, loneliness is unique to the person. And it's really less about being surrounded by people and more about being surrounded by the right people. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by that. Lonely goal-getters are typically in industries where they're leading in some capacity. You could be leading a team. You could be leading a business. You could be leading a brand. You could be leading a strategy or a plan. You could be leading a project. So you are either connected directly or indirectly with people in some way, shape, or form. So that means you are not void of that type of connection. You are connected with people. However, loneliness occurs, here's the real definition, okay? When you feel like you are not connected to people who understand you, who accept you, and embrace the uniqueness about you. And, right now as I'm doing this podcast, I'm thinking about this visual of how you can see big time performers, rappers, singers, different things of that nature. They get on these stages, they perform, they look successful. And, they're killing it. They're doing all the dance moves. They're singing on key. The crowd is hype, tens of thousands of people in the audience and they're going. Entourage, 30 people, 40 people, all these different people around them. But then you find out that they were depressed and they had a drug addiction or, they've been dealing with some crazy things behind the scenes or they've tried to commit suicide, which is, a very unfortunate situation. And there's just so many different things that you hear about like celebrities and bigger names. And so I want to give you that visual so that you can understand what I mean by you can be surrounded by people, but it's not really about being surrounded by people. It's about being surrounded by the right people. And again, those are people who understand you, accept you, and embrace the uniqueness about you. So we've defined what the real definition of loneliness is and how we can measure that. And now we have to figure out why it is that you may be lonely. Okay. So why are people not connecting with you in a way that they truly understand you, accept you, or embrace your uniqueness? And just to note there could be a broader definition of loneliness, but for the sake of this podcast, that's where we're going to keep it. Okay. So people are not connecting to you. Why, right? Is it because you're not a person that they can connect to or connect with, or are you not giving people the opportunity to do so? Okay. So if you're not giving people the access to connect with you deeply, there's a reason behind that. And typically there's 3 different, reasons why you're not allowing people to have deep connection with you. And these are the 3 reasons I've seen working with different clients. Okay. Again, there could be more reasons, but for the sake of this podcast, this is where we're going to keep it. So number 1, fear. And what I mean by fear, I mean a fear of connection. Okay. A fear of doing life on life relationships with people, a fear of connecting on a vulnerable level, a fear of transparency, a fear of connection. 2, shame. You're ashamed of something about you, something about your history, something about your life, something about what people may not know about you. There's some type of shame there. And then 3, there's a lack of value for relationships. So you probably have a misunderstanding of how important relationships really are to your life and the fact that relationships are truly currency. Now, loneliness isn't something you have to continue to experience. If you feel like you fit this mold and you rose your hand and say, you know what, I am a lonely goal getter, that's okay. You don't have to continue to be a lonely goal getter. The purpose of this episode is to make you aware of those issues and how you can make a change, transform, and shift things around. Okay. So being a high achieving, high performing, goal oriented woman is a lot of pressure in itself. So living in isolation without genuine connections and being surrounded by people, but not the right people, only adds to that pressure. So if you want to determine where that disconnect is and how you can come out of this place of isolation and how you can come out of this place of loneliness and kind of change things in your life, you got to ask those questions. Am I fearful of connection, and why? Okay. Why am I fearful of connection? I know for me personally, it had a lot to do with the trauma that I experienced in my upbringing. Because I had experienced molestation and different things of that nature, it really made me standoffish with people, connecting in any way with people honestly, in any fashion, no matter what that dynamic was. I didn't realize until I was an adult that when I did connect with people, it was surface. I didn't allow people to truly know me. I didn't give people the opportunity to truly see me because I was afraid, number one, of that connection. But then trauma also programmed me to not want to connect with people based on the offense that happened to me. And it being something that happened within my family and not necessarily feeling protected by family members and different things of that nature, that can sometimes create this perspective of you can't trust people in general. And so these were subconscious things that were happening in behind the scenes that I was not aware of. And it was translating into isolation and translating into not connecting. And so that could be one of the reasons. So you have to ask yourself, are you fearful of connection, and why? And then you got to ask yourself too, am I ashamed of something in my life or about my life? Okay. Am I ashamed? Am I ashamed about who I am as a person? Am I ashamed of my personality? Am I ashamed of my quirkiness? Am I ashamed of my difference? Am I ashamed of whatever? Am I dealing with perfectionism? And I know that I show up one way, but behind the scenes, I don't necessarily hit the mark or come all the way up to the standard of what people think that I am and people see me as. Am I ashamed of the trueness and the reality and the rawness of my personal life? You got to ask yourself, am I ashamed of something, and why? And then you got to ask yourself, do I see relationships as currency and life necessity? Okay. That's the raw and real truth. Some people think that work is more important than building relationships. Some people think that, building their business is more important than building relationships. People don't always see relationships as a necessity for their lives. We all have a natural desire for connection as human beings. There's something in your life that has distorted your ability to see relationships as valuable and a necessity for your life. And so you got to ask yourself that question, like, hey, why am I this way? Or, what's going on with me that I don't necessarily see a value in building sustainable relationships in my life? So these are questions I would strongly advise for you to think through. If you identify with being a lonely goal getter, or if you don't identify with being a lonely goal getter, if you're just listening to this podcast for just personal development reasons and you're like, I just want to grow, so I'm just listening in. Either way, it's a good time for you to really question your behaviors and your responses. Question how you're showing up in the world. Question how you're showing up in your relationships. Question, why am I still in this same place if it's been a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 and I'm still experiencing loneliness as a goal getter? I see my business flourishing. I see my career flourishing, but behind the scenes, right? I'm struggling when I get home. I'm having a hard time getting off the couch. I'm not experiencing the success that I experienced in my career, in my business, in my personal life. I'm experiencing, days where I feel sad. I'm having high highs and low lows, or just different things that are happening, in my life. I don't have true connections or true relationships with people. And I often isolate myself because I don't want to connect. Why is that, right? We have to have real, true, honest, raw moments with ourselves. And that's the only way that we can truly grow. Okay. So I know that this was a quick episode and one that I kind of really wrapped up really quickly for you, but I hope that throughout this episode, with the small points that I made that you were able to either raise your hand and say, that's me. And then number 2, raise your hand, say, that's me, and I want to make a change. And so that's my encouragement for you today. I strongly advise you to ask those questions and to answer those questions so that you can identify with what needs to change and how to change. Okay. So it's been great chatting with you today. I hope that this was an encouragement that you needed, or the encouragement that you needed to come out of isolation, confront those voids of loneliness within, and step into a more healthier way of living. Okay. You got this. I promise you, you do. This has been the Raven Knoll Show. Thanks for listening. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to this podcast so you're the first to know when new episodes are released. And don't forget to leave a review. If you can't wait until the next show, follow along on Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter at Raven C. Knoll for more tips and to keep the conversation going. Go ahead and DM me on Instagram or take a screenshot of this podcast and share it to your IG stories. I want to know about your takeaways from the show. Don't forget to tag me and use the hashtag RCNPodSquad. Lastly, visit my website at ravencnoll.com and join my email list to get exclusive bonuses only for my email subscribers. Thanks again for rocking and rolling with me. I'll talk to you soon.